τις τιμάς. Ούτε 10 δραχμές. Μη οράσως που κάνεις.
Καταδικαστέ ημίν, ηθικέ αξίες.
Μετέβηνες στον οβολοστάτη χθες.
Σχετώ το βίο. Λέγω εμ' αυτό. Ευρέ την άσχολη. Ή ξέρεις. Τι θα όταν είναι η
Χιλιόσπερσε.
Μη ο πρεσβύτερος. Πέφηκε άπαντα Αθήνε.
Τις χρεοδοτεί. Εγώ.
Here, visitor, and welcome to this sacred site. Delphi is an amazing place to visit if you're looking for information. I've come here on several occasions in search of answers to some particularly puzzling questions. And sometimes, I even found them. This is Delphi, home of the renowned oracle. Greeks considered it the navel of the world. Pilgrims and kings journeyed here from all over Greece and beyond, seeking advice from Apollo through the voice of his interpreter, Pythia. During your visit, you will experience the sanctuary through a pilgrim's eye and discover how important oracles and prophecies were to the people of Greece. Now, go off and begin your pilgrimage. I will be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
On their journey to the Temple of Apollo, pilgrims walked this sacred path up Mount Parnassus. The summer sun beat down hot on their backs. Along the way, they took in the magnificent monuments, treasuries, and statues that adorned the road. These landmarks were tokens of people's reverence for the oracle's benevolence. All were dedicated to Apollo, and most were offered by cities to commemorate military victories. The monuments represented not only their donors' piety, but also their power and wealth. The sanctity of Delphi has endured to the present day, and visitors still take this very same route.
Ήμαρτον, πάυσε.
Μεγαλώνει. Πολιώνει με περίπολα και τελετάρχα, θεών πάτσετε.
Θα βάλει στο επανέρχομαι, εστί αισιόδου.
One of the most impressive dedications to Apollo came from the Cnidians, a Greek population that colonized the island of Lipari, north of Sicily. The story behind this dedication is notable. The Cnidians were at war with the Etruscans in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Seeking a good omen, the Cnidians consulted the oracle, and following her advice, they successfully captured 20 enemy ships. To thank Apollo, they offered the god the same number of statues as ships seized.
Η ακριβής τελείως, ούκ έστι μη σπουδαίων, ο αιμός πατήρου.
Εξώς πατήρης θα ανέσχυτος κλέπτης. Οπότε εις αυτή το
Περί τίνων κοσμάτων. Περίπολε και τελετάρχα, Θεόν Πάτερ, Δε και Ιε, Υπούχε.
Next to the Naxian Sphinx stood a simple structure to display offerings from the Athenians, most of which were spoils of war. In particular, these offerings, called ex-votos, were prows of sunken Persian ships. The Athenians built the portico after their naval victory over the Persians in 478 BCE. Once arriving before the temple, pilgrims wishing to consult the oracle had to first pay a tax. This tax gave them the initial right to approach the altar of Apollo and make an animal sacrifice to the god. But before proceeding to the Pythia, the preliminary ritual had to succeed. If the animal reacted favorably and showed signs of acceptance to the god, it was sacrificed, and the pilgrim would be allowed to enter the temple to question the Pythia. At last, we arrive at the Temple of Apollo, where the oracle relayed her prophecies. The temple was the final destination of those seeking an audience with the Pythia, and its appearance matched the majesty of its purpose. Atop its imposing columns, the structure's pediments displayed famous mythological scenes, sculpted by the renowned Greek artist Antenor. But as grand as the temple looked from the outside, it paled in comparison with what happened within.
Αλλά η αφήγηση στις ιστορίες...
Prophecies were given in the most restricted part of the temple, the adytum, by a chaste woman known as the Pythia. Before delivering prophecies, she first purified herself with water, then burned laurel leaves and barley flour to begin the ritual. Finally, While seated on a tripod surrounded by offerings, the Pythia delivered Apollo's messages. Her words were often strange and indecipherable, and required further interpretation by the temple's priests. Despite much research, the exact causes of the oracle's behavior while prophesying are debated to this day. Myths say that while searching for an oracle who could impart their words to mortals, Apollo established a sanctuary on Mount Parnassus. Apollo took over this site by slaying its sinister guardian, the snake-like Python.
Your visit is complete. I hope you now understand how important this sanctuary was, and how it affected the lives of people both in the Greek world and beyond its borders. To be honest, I could speak about Delphi all day. But what would you like to do now? Ah, you wish to test your knowledge. Let's begin with a simple question. What did the oracle use to purify herself before her predictions? Correct. The oracle used water for purification. Time for another question. Which god was believed to speak through the oracle at Delphi? Yes, the oracle allegedly spoke the words of Apollo, which were then interpreted by priests. One final question for you. Delphi is situated on which mountain? Correct. Delphi stood on the slope of Mount Parnassus. Well done, traveler. Your knowledge rivals that of the wisest philosophers. As you wish. It has been a pleasure sharing Delphi with you.
Μεγαλώνουμε θεά, αγλαότιμε, τεχνών μήτυρ πολύολβε, πολυλίστη λυπήρα.
Welcome, visitor, to Thermopylae. My name is Leonidas. I am a king of Sparta. But do not think me some idle aristocrat softened by luxury. When Spartans go to war, I stand alongside them shield to shield. And my spear tastes the same blood as those of my men. Thermopylae stirs many feelings in my heart. Rage at the Persians' arrogance. Regret that I could not do more. But mostly, I feel proud. Proud of my city, and of my men, who fought to protect the very soul of the Spartan people. For those few fateful days, they were my brothers. I miss them all. Thermopylae was where a courageous group of Spartans stood amongst other Greek soldiers and held off the forces of King Xerxes, the Persian. When you're done, find me and we'll speak more.
The Persian king Darius's cries of rage echoed for years after his humiliating defeat at Marathon. Even after Darius's death, his son Xerxes continued to seek vengeance against the Greeks. According to Aeschylus, Asia was emptied of all its men. Greek spies brought the news of Xerxes' imminent invasion back to their homeland. Afterwards, many discussions were had on the best place to mount a defense. In the end, the Greeks decided on Thermopylae. The area featured a narrow pass that could act as a bottleneck for the Persian army, negating their numerical superiority. It also offered naval advantages, offering the Greek fleets opportunities for flanking. 5,000 Peloponnesian Greeks set up at a fort near the entrance of the narrow passage, otherwise known as the Hot Gates. Leading them was Leonidas, a Spartan king who prided himself on supposedly being a direct descendant of Heracles. Leonidas was accompanied by several elite soldiers who together made up the famous 300 Spartans. The Persian army arrived in the summer of 480 BCE, preceded by a flood of rumors regarding their strength and numbers. It was claimed they consumed 6,000 tons of wheat every day, and that they dried every river and brook they passed to quench their near-insatiable thirst. During their march to Thermopylae, the Persians faced no opposition, and in fact, increased their numbers further by recruiting more soldiers from other Greek cities and places like Thrace. According to Herodotus, the last count of the Persian fleet was numbered at 1,207 boats, mounted by approximately 240,000 men. He estimates the land army, meanwhile, was made up of more than 1 million men. The Greek forces at Thermopylae were heavily outnumbered. Xerxes believed that at the sight of his massive army, the Greeks at Thermopylae would flee in terror. Instead, they deliberated. The majority of the Peloponnesians wanted to engage the Persians on the Isthmus of Corinth. Leonidas, meanwhile, believed it was wiser to stay put in Thermopylae. While the Greek forces debated, a Persian horseman was sent to spy on the enemy. He returned to Xerxes with surprising news. Not only were the Greeks not fleeing, but the Spartans guarding the fort were exercising and combing their hair. A far cry from the fearful soldiers Xerxes expected. To increase the pressure on the Greeks, Xerxes waited 4 more days, then attacked on the 5th. The Persians faced heavy resistance and suffered many losses, and Herodotus says Xerxes leaped 3 times from his chair, seized with fear for his army. The following day proved to be just as difficult for the Persian forces, and the Greeks continued to stand their ground. The Persians seemed poised to be held at Thermopylae indefinitely, until an inhabitant from the region came forward with information. He told the Persians of another route which could take them around Thermopylae. A Persian contingent was sent to verify the information. While there were Greek soldiers stationed to guard the route, they were forced to flee from the Persians. Thus, on the 3rd day of the battle, the Greeks were surrounded by their enemy. With the Persians both in front of and behind them, the Greek forces at Thermopylae realized they had 2 choices: flee to live another day, or stand and fight till their last breath. Most of the Greeks chose the former option, but some stayed, including Leonidas and his 300 Spartans. For the Spartans, dying a glorious death was one of the highest honors they could achieve. The few members of Leonidas's Spartans who did not participate in the last stand at Thermopylae felt that they had missed an opportunity for honor and either committed suicide or continued living under the mockery and disgust of their fellow citizens. The Spartans' last stand was not only for glory, though. Had they not held off the Persians, the Greeks' retreating forces would probably have been cut down by enemy horsemen. On the morning of the 3rd day, King Xerxes was assured of his victory. However, that victory did not come easy. King Leonidas himself fell in battle, and a furious fight broke out around his body. The Spartans fought to the last man, and when they had all been slain, Leonidas's body was brought before Xerxes. According to Herodotus, Persians usually honored the most courageous warriors, even if they were enemies. However, Xerxes was so consumed by rage at the Spartans' resistance that instead he cut off Leonidas's head and ordered it impaled on a stake. A statue of a lion was later erected on the hill of the Spartans' last stand in honor of Leonidas's bravery. Though they were victorious, the Battle of Thermopylae shook the morale of the Persian army. They had lost thousands of men, while Greek casualties only numbered in the hundreds. And due to the sacrifice of the Spartans, the rest of the Greek army had been able to successfully retreat and regroup. As a result, even as Xerxes set up camp at the foot of Athens' Acropolis, ready to get revenge for his father's humiliating defeat at Marathon, the Persians were more anxious than confident. They were more aware than ever that the Greeks did not fear them and were ready to die defending their land. In the end, the Battle of Thermopylae was still a loss for the Greeks. However, the battle gave the Greeks a boost in morale that carried them all the way to their decisive victory over the Persians in the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE. With the war against the Persians finally won, the Greeks were able to honor the sacrifice of Leonidas and his Spartans with a memorial forever solidifying the glory of Sparta's military prowess. The newfound respect for Sparta was noteworthy, because before the war, the city was seen as no more than a bully who forced itself into the affairs of others. Thermopylae changed opinions of Sparta for the better, and gave them a legitimate claim to be one of Greece's most powerful and influential cities.
You've finished. I hope you understand the magnitude of the sacrifices made at Thermopylae. Without them, the Greek people would have surely ended as a footnote in Persian history. Is there something else you'd like to do? If you think you're ready, let's begin. First question. Who was Xerxes' father? Yes. One of the main reasons Xerxes invaded Greece was to get revenge for Darius' defeat at the Battle of Marathon. Another question for you. Which battle is seen as the final victory against Xerxes' Persian forces? No. Try again. The Battle of Marathon took place long before Xerxes invaded. Try another answer. Correct. The Battle of Plataea helped put an end to Xerxes' invasion. One last question. How many Spartans fought at the Battle of Thermopylae? No, that would not have been enough. Keep trying. No, if that were true, we would not have lost. Try a different answer. 30 Spartans against an army of Persians makes for an exciting story, but also one that is untrue. Try again. Yes, 300 of us stood against Xerxes' forces. You've done well, visitor. I have no more questions for you. Farewell, visitor.
Μαρία κινείται μεταξύ 3 βαθμίδων. Στην εκτίμηση των δεών του σταυρωτόκι.
Καταδικαστέα η αστέρες ανατέλουσε με την κίνηση. Πώς, ήρθατε κρεμά.
Μάλλον το αίμα αυτό λέγω χθες. Μάλλον αυτό θύστημη λέγονε με αυτό.
Welcome to Amphipolis, traveler. The Battle of Amphipolis was surely an interesting one. One might even call it anticlimactic. But that does not mean it wasn't important in the greater scheme of the Peloponnesian War. The city of Amphipolis was the site of one of the more unique battles of the Peloponnesian War. Two generals, the Athenian Cleon and the Spartan Brasidas, fought for this land in an effort to control the resources it provided. In the end, though, neither got what they wanted. Look for me when you finish your visit, and we can speak of what you've learned.
The land that would come to be known as Amphipolis was originally part of Thrace, a region inhabited by formidable semi-nomadic horsemen. Thrace was rich in gold and silver mines. It was surrounded by lush forests, making it very attractive to outside parties like Greece and Persia. By 513 BCE, Persia had managed to conquer much of Thrace. But after their defeat in 479 BCE, Athens made a play for the land. They conquered the nearby island of Thasos in 465 BCE, but the military prowess of the Thracian riders kept them out of the country's interior. It was only in 436 BCE that Athens established a solid foothold in Thrace with the founding of Amphipolis, a city on the banks of the river Strymon. During the Peloponnesian War, the Spartan general Brasidas sought a way to subvert Athenian power across the Greek world. He set his sights on capturing the coast of Thrace, hoping to seize the resources the area provided. Brasidas knew that many of the Greeks living in Thrace hated the greed and brutality of their Athenian neighbors and decided to take advantage of the situation. He set off on an expedition to Amphipolis, accompanied by 1,000 hoplites and 700 helots, and arrived before the city in the winter of 424 BCE. At Amphipolis' ramparts, Brasidas announced that he preferred to take the city peacefully and promised to allow safe passage to any inhabitants who wished to leave, in addition to sparing those who wanted to cooperate. This proposal was well received by the city's residents, and he was able to capture Amphipolis without striking a single blow. Brasidas' march on Amphipolis blindsided the Athenians. By the time they heard the news and dispatched the general Thucydides to defend Amphipolis, Brasidas had already rallied several nearby cities to help him defend the region from Athens' so-called tyranny. After half a day's journey from Thasos, Thucydides arrived at the port of Aeon, but was unable to retake Amphipolis. Athens held Thucydides responsible for the loss of Amphipolis and forced the general into exile. In spite of Brasidas' achievements, Sparta did not send him reinforcements, which forced the general to negotiate a truce with Athens to hold on to the ground he gained. The matter of how to deal with Amphipolis divided Athens. The politician Nicias, as well as the city of Sparta, hoped that peace could be negotiated. However, the popular Athenian statesman and general Cleon wanted to continue fighting the war. Indecision continued until 422 BCE, when Cleon was elected as one of Athens' strategists. This decision made it clear that the city's people were in favor of war. The truce was ended, and Cleon began his journey to Amphipolis, retaking small towns that had been conquered by Brasidas along the way. On arriving at the port of Aeon, Cleon requested troops from the king of Macedonia. He also hired several Thracian mercenaries to bolster his force's numbers. Afterwards, all Cleon could do was wait for the remainder of his reinforcements. While they waited, the Athenian forces began to resent Cleon's hesitation to attack. They saw him as soft and incompetent, especially compared to their opponent, Brasidas. Sensing the tension, Cleon decided to act without waiting for reinforcements to arrive. He set out from the port of Aeon to observe Amphipolis, setting up a camp on a nearby hill. To Cleon's surprise, Amphipolis appeared to be completely unprotected, with no guards stationed at the city's gates and ramparts. However, the city's lack of protection was only an illusion. Even so, upon seeing this, Cleon regretted that he did not bring wooden towers, which would have allowed him to easily recapture the city. Brasidas positioned his own troops in a nearby wooded area to get a better view of Cleon's army. When the Athenians began moving to set up camp, Brasidas returned to Amphipolis. He believed his army was less well-trained than the Athenians and decided to rely instead on cunning tactics and Cleon's inexperience as a military leader. Brasidas organized a two-prong attack. He would personally lead a small raid, then one of his lieutenants would follow up with a second attack shortly after, disorienting the enemy. He had barely finished formulating his plan when he saw Cleon's army pack up and retreat back towards the coast. The cowardly display made Brasidas realize that perhaps victory would be easier than he thought. After seeing Brasidas' troops return to Amphipolis, Cleon decided to fall back to the port of Aeon and once again wait for reinforcements. Unfortunately, his exact orders were confusing and contradictory, which left the Athenian forces in disarray. Brasidas took advantage of this confusion and began his attack. Cleon's forces panicked, which made them easy prey for the Spartans. 600 Athenians were killed, while the Spartans only lost 7 men. Cleon's remaining forces took refuge in Aeon, where the bodies of their comrades were eventually returned to them, though only after being stripped of their weapons. During the pitched battle between the Spartans and the Athenians, both Brasidas and Cleon were killed. The reports of their respective deaths reflect how they were perceived as military leaders. We know almost nothing about Cleon's death, other than that he was killed by a Thracian soldier. Brasidas, meanwhile, survived long enough to be taken back to Amphipolis, where he was informed of his victory. He was buried inside the city, which was considered an honor bestowed only upon heroes, and was celebrated as the true founder of Amphipolis. The Battle of Amphipolis temporarily put an end to the hostilities between Athens and Sparta. The Athenian forces returned to Piraeus, while Sparta called back the reinforcements they'd sent for Brasidas. The death of both Brasidas and Cleon encouraged the two cities to push for peace. The negotiations took time, but Sparta and Athens eventually agreed to return to the way things were before the Peloponnesian War. The resulting treaty became popularly known as the Peace of Nicias. Throughout the Greek world, it was mostly agreed that Sparta had lost the war, in spite of Brasidas' heroic efforts. The sentiment was rooted in the fact that Sparta had failed to end Athens' domination over Greece, something they had promised to do at the start of the war.
I see you're done with your tour. The Battle of Amphipolis may have briefly put an end to the Peloponnesian War, but the so-called Peace of Nicias was only temporary. It would not be long before Sparta and Athens came to blows once again. Now, is there something else you'd like to do? Feeling up to a test? Then let us begin. Which Athenian politician wanted to negotiate peace with Sparta? Cleon wanted to continue hostilities with Sparta, not end them. Try another answer. Lycurgus was a legendary Spartan lawgiver. Keep trying. Correct. Nicias wanted to build on the truce that was negotiated after Brasidas captured Amphipolis. Now for the second question. Where did Thucydides and Cleon arrive before moving to retake Amphipolis? No. Piraeus was closer to Athens. Keep trying. Yes. Ion is where both Thucydides and Cleon's forces arrived before trying to retake the city. I have one last question for you. Amphipolis was located in which region? Yes, Amphipolis was located in Thrace. It seems there's nothing I can ask that you cannot answer. Congratulations, traveler. Very well. I hope you enjoyed your visit.
Έχω μεν πόδας βαμβακεράς εξελίπτου.
Βινάχε και οι κρύες των ημένα εξ Ατλαντίδος ή εκ του προπτούσου.
Welcome to Corinth, Wanderer. I have a special visit planned for you today. It's an intimate, informative look into the daily lives of Greek women. It's amazing what women could accomplish while men spend all day trying to out-debate each other at assembly meetings. Their work should be far more appreciated on the whole, but we're going to acknowledge that now. Corinth was one of the largest cities in ancient Greece. It had an estimated population of 90,000 in my times, and much of that population was made up of women. This tour will shine a light on those women and look at how they lived on a day-to-day basis. Look for me when you're done with your visit, and we can discuss things further.
Young girls growing up in ancient Greek cities were usually raised by a nurse. They mostly stayed in the women's quarters of the house, the gunaikon, where they spent their time spinning threads and weaving. While there is not much historical evidence of young girls at play, especially compared to boys, it was still known to happen. For example, an ancient terracotta group depicts two girls playing atEpidorius. This was a competition to see who could strike an upright rock from afar using a pebble or ball. The game's loser had to close their eyes and carry the victor until they managed to touch the same rock with their hands. For a young Greek woman, marriage was the culmination of their induction into society. The average life expectancy for women was about 40 years, so most marriages took place when the bride was 14 or 15 years old. The marriage did not require her consent either. Instead, she was passed on from the protection of her father to that of her husband. Married women were not technically citizens at the time and lacked the rights that came with official citizenship. However, they did receive a dowry that only they were allowed to spend, but in the event of a failed marriage, the dowry was returned to the bride's father. After the marriage was consummated, the woman's status changed from being a maiden to a bride. She remained a bride until the birth of her first child, wherein she officially became a woman.
Ψεύτιση. Σφαιρίδιον. Ασήμαντον.
Women living in ancient Greek cities were essentially forbidden from participating in political life, and most aspects of their lives were controlled by men. Their most important responsibilities were running the household and giving birth to children, preferably boys. Most of the time, women's excursions outside of the house were limited to visiting other female neighbors, as per custom. The few exceptions to this strict rule were weddings, funerals, and religious festivals involving women in prominent public roles. Making textiles was the main occupation of most Greek women. It was a woman's responsibility to manufacture clothing for each of her family members, as well as to weave other household textiles. Women with exceptional weaving skills were believed to make excellent wives, and weaving in general was seen as a very attractive quality. For example, Homer describes Odysseus's devoted wife Penelope as spending most of her days weaving at the loom. Similarly, many Greek vases depicting women weaving were combined with images of a woman holding a veil, which was seen as the symbol of a bride. Ancient Greek women cooked in their house's kitchen area. However, since their cooking equipment was small and portable, they also sometimes prepared meals in the central courtyard. This was also where women performed other domestic activities. These activities were rarely seen by visiting men or passers-by, because the architecture of classical Greek houses facilitated the social norm that women should never be seen at work. The historian Strabo relays that the Temple of Aphrodite was one of Corinth's most famous landmarks. This was largely due to the temple's female patrons. These hetairai, as they were called, were donated to the goddess by both men and women. According to Strabo, the Temple of Aphrodite contributed greatly to Corinth's wealth. The hetairai were the temple's main attraction, and many visitors came to Corinth in search of their company, for which they spent frequently and frivolously.
Hello again, Wanderer. I hope your visit was an interesting one. Greek women lived very restricted lives compared to men, but throughout it all, they held on to their strength and dignity. Is there anything else you'd like to do? Feeling up for a test? Excellent! Let's begin with an easier question. What was the name of the women's quarters in a Greek home? The Ireon was a temple dedicated to the goddess Hera. Try again. No, Gini was the status a woman achieved after the birth of her first child. Keep trying. The Andron was actually the men's section of the house, where they held their symbosia. Try another answer. Correct. The Gynekon was where young girls spent their days weaving and spinning threads. On to the next question. The Corinthian temple said to employ the Hetera was dedicated to which god? No, the temple was not dedicated to Athena. Try a different answer. Correct. Aphrodite was the goddess of love and passion, so it's only fitting her temple served such an amorous purpose. We're almost done. Just one more question. What was the name of Odysseus' wife? Helen was the wife of King Menelaos before Paris of Troy abducted her. Keep trying. Clytemnestra was the wife of King Agamemnon of Mycenae. Try again. Yes, Penelope was Odysseus' loyal wife, who kept at her weaving while waiting for her husband to return from war. You passed the test, Wanderer. Congratulations. Then farewell, Wanderer, and thank you for visiting this great place.
Hello, my friend. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Corinth's Temple of Aphrodite. Why, I'm Marcos, of course, one of the most successful merchants in all of Greece. You really haven't heard of me? My name is known from Kefalonia to Kos. If you've ever paid money for something, I probably received a percentage. But enough about me. Let's go back to what you're doing here. It really is a lovely sight, isn't it? The temple, that is, not the ladies. Although they are also lovely. Lovely and lively and, I'm sorry, what were we talking about? In Greece, many love stories were told about the gods. How romantic. Sometimes they were heartwarming and happy, but they often ended in tears, tragedy, and a whole brood of illegitimate children. I'm looking at you, Zeus! Anyway, this tour will introduce you to some of these divine love stories, which may give you perspective on how the Greeks approached love in their own lives. Enjoy your visit, my friend. I'll come see you again when you finish the tour.
Σχολεία. Ω, ναι. Ίστα έχω ευποδία και ημί καλήφωνος. Ο πατήρ μου έλεγε «Δίν με δίνε».
Ήκουσα την ειδήθιαν τάφη και το πρόβλημα.
Επικαλούμε σε, μάτρα.
Much like Athens, Corinth had its own acropolis, called the Acrocorinth. The natural promontory provided an excellent view of the surrounding territory. It was also the home of several sanctuaries, allegedly constructed in the 6th century BCE. The Acrocorinth's most famous attraction was the Temple of Aphrodite. Pausanias describes it as having statues of Aphrodite, her son Eros, and the sun god Helios. According to Strabo, the temple's most distinguishing feature was its servants, who acted as sacred prostitutes. However, Strabo is the only source for this information, and it is still hotly debated to this day. Love played a large role in countless mythological stories. Zeus himself was not immune to the feeling, and fell for both mortals and other deities. Some myths centered on forbidden feelings that led to tragedy, such as Phaedra's love for her stepson Hippolytus. While marriage was prominent in mythology, it was usually presented as problematic. For example, Aphrodite frequently cheated on her husband Hephaestus, and Medea's resentment against her ex-husband Jason eventually drove her mad enough to murder her children. These less-than-ideal depictions reflected the Greeks' idea of marriage, which they viewed as a civic duty instead of a romantic union. The goddess Aphrodite was one of the mightiest Olympians and was typically associated with love, beauty, and sex. She was worshipped all across the ancient Mediterranean by men and women, both young and old. Her origins differ depending on the version of the story. The poet Hesiod says that she was born from the severed genitals of Uranos, while Homer's version of the myth names her as the daughter of Zeus and Dione. Aphrodite appeared regularly in mythological stories and had many mortal lovers. Her favorite was Adonis, a beautiful boy who died tragically in a hunting accident. Aphrodite was devastated by his death, so she created a cult called the Adonia to commemorate him.
My friend, good to see you again. I bet you were surprised by some of the stories you heard. For a bunch of immortal beings, the gods certainly were saucy, eh? Tell me if there's anything else I can do for you. Is that so, my friend? Then let's get started. Which poet said that Aphrodite was the daughter of Zeus and Dione? I am exceedingly flattered that you think I'm a poet. Unfortunately, I am a mere brilliant but misunderstood businessman. Keep trying, though. Hesiod's version of this story said Aphrodite was the product of Uranos's, chopped olives, so to speak. So, no. I'm afraid Phidias was a sculptor. Try again. Yes, it was Homer who said Aphrodite was a child of Zeus. On to the next question. Medea was married to which legendary hero? Odysseus was married to Penelope. Try again. Depending on the story, Heracles married many women, but none of them were Medea. Try another answer. Pelops was a one-woman kind of man, but that woman was Hippodamia, not Medea. Keep trying. Yes, Medea was married to Iason, but after he left her for someone else, she resented him so much she murdered their children. But let's not talk about such depressing things. Instead, you can answer this last question. What was the name of Corinth's Acropolis? No. Although now that I hear it, I must admit that Acropolint really rolls off the tongue. Ha! That's what I would have called it. Unfortunately, it's not the Acropolis's actual name. Correct. The Acrocorinth has been home to many sanctuaries, as well as the famous Temple of Aphrodite. You passed the test! Congratulations, my intelligent friend! Normally, I don't let people go until they buy a souvenir, but for you, my friend, I'll make an exception!
αυτής είναι τραπεζίτας. Το ακούσε αυτής ότι...
Greetings, my friend. Welcome to Arcadia, home of shepherds, sheep, and manure. I recently made an offer to buy some nearby farmland. Unfortunately, the owner refused, based on completely unsubstantiated rumors that I once burned down 3 farms in Kos. Can you believe it? I've never burned down a farm in my life. I may have once paid someone else to do so, but I assure you, my reasons were entirely acceptable and in the best interest of everyone involved. Arcadia was well known for its sublime natural vistas. Farmers and shepherds were seduced by its beauty, and it's easy to see why. I have to leave for now, but I'll meet you again when you finish your visit. Until then, my friend!
Grain was a staple of the Greek diet, to the point where Homer referred to his compatriots as mortal eaters of bread. Grain farming was a meticulous process. Due to dry summers, artificial irrigation was impossible, so farmers had to rely on rainfall to water their crops. This gave them very narrow windows for sowing and harvesting. On a farm of this size, only half of the field would be planted every year, while the other half would lie fallow to avoid exhausting the soil. According to the poet Hesiod, the best time to sow grain was in autumn, and the best time to harvest it was in May. Fortunately, if farmers missed their opportunity, they also had a chance to plant millet in the spring. Before planting in a field, the land needed to be plowed a total of 3 times. Once in the spring to remove weeds, again in the summer to aerate the soil, and a final time in the winter to plant the seeds in the moist earth. The plow was pulled by 2 oxen, while the sowing of seeds was done by hand. After the seeds were planted, a boy turned the soil with a hoe to protect them from hungry birds. Once the sowing was finished, the farmers waited for winter rains to irrigate the field. They also prayed to the goddess of agriculture, Demeter, and her daughter Persephone, in the hopes of being favored with a bountiful harvest come springtime. Grain was harvested in the spring using a curved knife called a sickle. With their backs to the wind, the reapers cut the plant stalks and left the sheaves behind before moving through the rest of the crop. Once the harvest was mowed, the sheaves were brought to the threshing floor. Animal husbandry was an important part of Greek agriculture. Farmers usually kept cattle, donkeys, sheep, goats, pigs, dogs, geese, and chickens. The animals mostly fed in pastures, but could also eat some of the farm's harvested grain, as well as damaged fruit and residue from olive oil and wine production. Livestock had several purposes. Their manure was used to fertilize the fields, and their grazing helped remove weeds. Arcadia was a mountainous region believed to be the home of the god Pan, so farmers were more likely to keep sheep and goats than cattle. Most farming tools were simple, handmade implements made of wood and occasionally tipped with iron. The most complicated tool was the plough, which was made up of several parts, including a beam, a drawbar, and a yoke. A two-pronged hoe, meanwhile, was used for tilling soil, and farmers also had tools for digging and weeding. After the sheaves were harvested, workers brought them to the threshing floor to extract the grain. Oxen or donkeys were hitched to a post in the center of the floor and guided around it, while workers threw sheaves under their hooves. The animals, stomping, forced the grain kernels out of their casings. Afterwards, the kernels were collected for the winnowing process. Winnowing helped separate the heavier grain seeds from the chaff. It began with using a wooden shovel to toss the grain. While in the air, the wind blew away the lighter chaff, leaving only the heavier grain. To remove the remaining chaff, the grain was tossed in a wooden basket called a lignon, which filtered the grain until only clean kernels remained. Barley, which was used to make flour, was different from other types of grain. Threshing was not enough to separate the barley from its husk, so instead, it was roasted in a specialized tool called a frigatron. After the barley was roasted, it was pounded with a mortar and pestle. The pounded grain was then ground into a meal using either a hand mill or a hopper mill. Grinding was boring work, so workers often lightened the mood with a mill song. Once the barley was completely ground, it was sieved using a wicker basket called a koskinon, making it ready for use. Grain storage areas needed to be dark, dry, cool, contained, and well ventilated to prevent the grain from spoiling. According to Hesiod, the preferred method of storing grain was in a pithos, the same container as Pandora's mythological box. Archaeological evidence suggests that Greeks may have also stored grain in small, walled structures woven from branches. Farms generally needed to store enough grain to sustain themselves for the year and seed corn for the next. Any surplus was either stored for a lean year or sold to markets for profit.
My friend! Good to see you again! You must feel hungry. I know I would, spending all that time watching farmers working themselves to the bone. Now, what else can I do for you? If you say so, let's get started. According to Hesiod, what was the best month to start harvesting grain? Yes, spring was the ideal time for harvesting. Guess I'm not the only smart one around here. Time for another question. Which tool did reapers use to cut stalks? Hoes were used to till the soil, not cut the stalks. Keep trying. Yes, a sickle was a curved knife, making it ideal for harvesting sheaves of grain. Only one question left. Arcadia was believed to be the home of which god? Panakia was Asclepios' daughter. and didn't really have a connection to Arcadia. Keep trying though, my friend. Athena was the patron of Athens. She didn't even live in Arcadia. Try again. Correct. Pan supposedly called the mountainous region his home. Incredible work, my friend. It's safe to say your mind is definitely more wheat than chaff. Safe travels, my friend. We'd better be seeing each other again soon. My friend, good to see you. Must say.
Welcome, traveler, to the sanctuary of Asclepios, a place of rest and healing. The sanctuary of Asclepios is an amazing place, even for those with only a passing interest in medicine. It was a fascinating location, combining the mystical, religious, and scientific. And if someone happened to pass out, they'd luckily be surrounded by skilled physicians. This is the sanctuary of Asclepios, the god of medicine. It was here that the sick and weary came, seeking cures for their ailments. Sometimes the medical practitioners provided the cures, and sometimes the healing came from the gods themselves. This tour will help explain the inner workings of the sanctuary, as well as the unique way the Greeks approached medicine. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The ill and infirm came to this sanctuary to pray and offer sacrifices to Asclepios, the god of medicine. According to myth, Asclepios was once a mortal physician who eventually became a god. He had many sanctuaries across Greece, but the most famous was in atEpidorius. When pilgrims passed through the entrance of the sanctuary, they could read this inscription: "When you enter the abode of the god which smells of incense, you must be pure, and thought is pure when you think with piety." Medical steles constituted a sort of hub between medicine, religion, and the divine. They were slabs with inscriptions that praised Asclepios' virtues and merit, and described his methods of healing. The inscriptions relayed the dreams patients had within the abaton, one of the most important buildings in the sanctuary. The steles outlined the patient's name, their disease, and how they were cured by Asclepios. They were probably written by the sanctuary's priests, or at least under the priest's supervision. Asclepios was a complex deity. In addition to being a god, he was also a trained physician and disciple of the centaur Chiron.
Βασανιώσε. Διατάξω τους αλήθας δώσιν σι ενισχυρών. Ο αφήκας ναό δεσπόζει εν το αγίου του ημού εγκεφάλου πόθωρη. Η θαμά επανέρχομαι στη Ισιόδου θεογονία.
In ancient Greece, religion was inseparable from rites, processions, and sacrifices. This was no different in Epidorus, and visitors to Asclepios' sanctuary needed to prepare themselves accordingly. Pilgrims cleaned themselves in order to be pure, then offered Asclepios food like honey cakes, cheesecakes, baked meats, and figs. The food was placed on the sanctuary's holy table, where it was presumably later taken by priests. After the preliminary offerings, visitors were allowed to enter the abaton, where they would hopefully encounter Asclepios in a dream. Medical steles also mention that healed patients sometimes gave additional offerings to Asclepios as thanks for being cured.
Στην υγεία κατάστασης λογικού νου. Ο λογικός νους αντίκειται την τραγωδία. Και τη συγκρούς λάβει ο εφόσερτης και Ορμός έστι κλέπτισος δια των υποκριτών. Οι χαρακτήρες εν τες τραγωδίες προαιρούνται του ύψους της διανοίας Ένεκε. Τραγωδία εκλαμβάνει τας ιστορίας αυτών και χρείται τα αυτές τραγωδίες.
Asclepius was originally born a mortal and was the product of an affair between the god Apollo and a mortal, Coronis. Apollo killed Coronis after discovering she had been unfaithful and ordered her body burned on a funeral pyre. However, he rescued his unborn child from Coronis's womb before the fire consumed her body. Apollo gave the baby to the centaur Chiron, who raised Asclepius and taught him to practice medicine. Over time, Asclepius became so skilled in the art of healing, he could even raise the dead. This angered Zeus, who sent Asclepius to Hades with a thunderbolt. Apollo retaliated by killing the Cyclopes, responsible for making Zeus's thunderbolts. Then, Zeus revived Asclepius, making him immortal and deifying him in the process. In sculptures, pottery, mosaics, and coins, Asclepius was portrayed holding a staff intertwined with a sacred snake. The staff is a symbol of medicine that still endures to this day.
Περί τίνων κοσμημάτων συνελέγει.
Καλώς, γε. Νην ακούομεν την καρδία σου. Είπε ο αδελφός σου ότι διερευνώμη τη συνάφεια μεταξύ σφιγμού τε μουσικής. Χρώμε την ίδια.
Δέο με πάυσε και κίνησον στόμα.
The Epidodion was the priest's residence. As the link between patients and the gods, priests were essential to the operation of the sanctuary, They were often elected into the priesthood for one-year periods, but could also buy themselves a position if they were wealthy enough. In addition to interpreting patients' dreams in the abaton, priests both supervised and performed sacrifices and rituals. During these functions, they were usually clad in white. The abaton was built in the northern boundary of the sanctuary, where it surrounded a sacred well whose water was believed to have therapeutic properties. The abaton was where pilgrims went for incubation, or dream rituals. Details of the incubation ritual have been described in unearthed medical steles. They were also noted in Aristophanes' play Plutos, which featured a more comedic view of the process. Incubation was the dream ritual pilgrims experienced in the abaton. After completing the necessary preliminary rituals, pilgrims were allowed to enter the sacred building, where they lay prone. As they took in the smell of burning incense, the sanctuary's priests extinguished the oil lamps and asked them to sleep in silence. Once they were asleep, Asclepios would appear in their dreams and give his medical advice. The advice included diet and treatment recommendations, as well as requests for specific offerings or religious rituals. Upon waking up, priests interpreted the patient's dreams, unless a patient had been miraculously healed in their sleep. However, if a patient was completely beyond help, they were removed from the abaton. This was to adhere to a ritual law that stated that no one could die or be born within the building.
I see you've completed the tour. I hope you enjoyed your time in the sanctuary. As you can see, gods and miracles were just as important to the healing process as medicine was. Now, what else would you like to do? Excellent. Here is your first question. Which mythical creatures made Zeus's thunderbolts? Correct. Zeus's thunderbolts were crafted by Cyclops. On to the second question. What was the name of the building where incubation occurred? Yes, pilgrims entered the abaton to undergo a dream ritual in the hopes of curing their ailments. One final question for you. Who was Asclepios' father? Hippocrates was thought to be a descendant of Asclepios, not the god's father. Try a different answer. Aegea was related to Asclepios, but she was his daughter. Keep trying. Yes, Apollo was Asclepios' father, and his mother was a mortal named Coronis. You've proven you know the sanctuary inside and out. Well done. Very well. May your quest for knowledge be fruitful and fulfilling.
Επικαλούμε σε, Μάκαν. Πολυώνυμε.
Τραγωδία διαφθείρει τους νέους και ούτε καταμαρθακίζουν.
Ο ιός μου βαρέα τραύματα φέρει. Στεχόβεται μία εξέλιξη.
προσέχει φέτος ως δια των κοπηλών
Εμείς με παρόδο θα τον χρεών της χείρας. Πού ήταν ο Σεβάκης.
Welcome to Argos, traveler. I have always admired the dedication of Greek metalworkers. Without them, we would not have the inspiring monuments that stir the hearts of Greek citizens everywhere. This is Argos, one of the oldest cities in Greece. The Argives were an ingenious people, famous for innovations in areas like military tactics. However, what they were most renowned for was their metallurgic artistry, especially with bronze. I hope you enjoy yourself. Look for me at the end of your visit.
The area that would become Argos was inhabited as early as the 3rd millennium BCE, but it was in the 7th century BCE that it officially became a city-state. One of Argos's major pillars was its metallurgical industry. As far back as the 8th century BCE, the city was famed for making products like long dress pins and tripod cauldrons, as well as impeccable body armor. In addition to their technical excellence, the Argives were also creative, as seen in their masterful bronze sculpting, which became prominent in the city during the 6th and 5th century BCE. Bronze is an alloy composed of 90% copper and 10% tin. Because of this, copper and tin needed to be smelted and combined to create the material needed for sculpting. After the bronze alloy was formed, it was melted in special furnaces. They required a tremendous amount of fuel and were usually supplied with charcoal made from specific types of wood. It's possible they were also coated with a protective lining of clay, which would have been sensible given the melting point of bronze is approximately 950 degrees Celsius. Once the bronze was melted and collected, the furnaces were dismantled and dumped. In the 8th century BCE, most small-scale statues were molded using a complicated and lengthy method called solid lost wax casting. From the 7th century BCE onwards, metalworkers adopted the more efficient hollow lost wax casting. At its core, this process involved using sculpting models from wax, making molds over these models, then filling the molds with bronze to produce the desired shapes. The process was advantageous because it saved on materials, produced lighter statues, and reduced the chance of possible defects. Once all the pieces of the sculpture were molded, they were welded together and subjected to the cold working process. This process involved repairing the sculpture's flaws by filling any holes and cracks with specifically measured bronze patches. Afterwards, the sculpture was scraped, chiseled, and polished until it was deemed satisfactory. Decorative details like hair, eyebrows, and mustaches were added with the use of a sharp tool. Eyes, which could be inset with ivory, glass, or silver, were attached to their sockets using a resinous kind of glue. Teeth and fingernails were inlaid with silver, and lips and nipples with copper. These small touches added color and contributed to the sculpture's lifelike appearance. Bronze sculptures have a long and varied history in Greece. During the geometric period of 900 to 700 BCE, the sculptures mainly depicted idealized heroes, charioteers, and horses, and most of them were dedicated to sanctuaries. The Orientalizing period followed in the 7th century BCE. During this time, Greeks began adopting sculpting techniques from the East, and the depicted statues expanded to include mythological creatures like griffins and sphinxes. The Archaic period saw statues that reflected a better understanding of human anatomy, which eventually culminated in the realistic and powerful human sculptures of the Hellenistic period. Argos was the home of Polykleitos, one of the most famous sculptors in ancient Greece. His works, like the Doryphorus and Diadomenos, as well as his treatise on sculpting called the Canon, had a massive impact on the art as a whole, particularly in regards to ideal bodies. The origins of sculptures have along choose from antiquity. As went on, many bronze statues were even churches. Marble copies from the Roman period are our best evidence of the masterpieces of Greek sculpture.
I see you have completed your tour. I trust you have